You know your physical health is important. You know your mental health is important. But did you know that your physical and your mental health are correlated? Probably. But if you're like me and most other folk, then you know that it's hard to maintain a proper diet and exercise routine and self-care. So in today's episode, we're talking with Dr. Parker Hayes, who's going to be sharing with us tips and tricks to maximize our mental and physical health and overcome obstacles. So let's go. So does this go hand in hand then with long-term resilience? We talked about the short-term kind of stress survival resilience, but what about the long-term stress management so we don't burn out? Is this kind of the same protocol?
It is inexorably related, yes. That stress that stacks, it has physical and mental manifestations forever. Those physical manifestations then stack and have difficulty being overcome, even if you have a good mindset, because you may have done significant physical damage. So how do you create overall resilience on both those fronts and other fronts that may be particularly important to you, spiritual fronts, etc.? I'm a big believer in functional fitness. I think it's great to work out, but to work out in a way that speaks to the needs of daily movement and functioning, bending over, getting on the floor to play with kids, and standing up.
Dr. Parker Hayes is a seasoned board-certified emergency physician, medical director, and professor with a passion for men's health and wellness. He is the co-founder of the Lasting Impact Wellness Group, a company dedicated to providing health and well-being coaching and consulting services. With a background in emergency medicine, Dr. Hayes has a unique perspective on the importance of maintaining physical and mental health, particularly for men over 50. His expertise extends to executive wellness, longevity, and mental health. So let's meet Dr. Hayes. Hello, Dr. Hayes, and thank you so much for making time to be on the Mental Health Toolbox today, the podcast. I really appreciate your time. For anyone listening or watching on the YouTube channel, Dr. Parker Hayes is joining us today from North Carolina, where he has his group practice, Lasting Impact Wellness Group. Is that correct?
That's right, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. You're a wealth of information. I appreciate you taking time to be on today to share all of your wisdom around health as a physician, having been in the trenches for so long, and then, of course, starting your mission to educate the masses on how we can integrate health and wellness and mental health and do it in a sustainable way. So thank you for that.
Thank you again.
Excellent. So, Dr. Hayes, can you tell us a little bit about what brought you into this space, a little bit about your background? I know you were a physician for quite some time, as well as a medical director and an educator, professor, and so just a wealth of information. How did you get into this field of health and wellness?
Well, thank you for asking. Sometimes one, even if they inhabit their own story, doesn't know the answer to all those things.
Isn't that the truth?
They're made to articulate them. But I guess looking back at the beginning, and I promise it won't be a tremendously long saw, I hope, but I was extremely lucky growing up in a university setting where I had highly educated and invested parents, and I had a wealth of exposures: athletic, musical, artistic, intellectual, geographic. And everything was fairly swimmingly going until my dad got very ill. And my mother and father both had chronic illnesses. And although they were still very invested, I found myself in my teen years needing to fulfill certain roles for the family that I hadn't expected. And frankly, I wasn't that happy about at the time, being a teenager who wanted the planets to orbit around me.
As most do. Yeah.
I found that if I needed to build something or fix something in the house, then it was on me. And there were also a lot of acute emotional and mental health crises to manage at that time as well. And albeit clumsily, I guess I got very used to being able to handle whatever came next for at least my then age and abilities. And I'm sure that that ultimately led me to medicine, and specifically later emergency medicine. I like to fix stuff acutely and get after it. And over the next 30 years or so, now 32 years in, I've cared for and learned from, most of all, the breadth of humanity. The ER is the great equalizer. It is the place where everyone goes eventually, almost. And so, with all that right in front of me during the last decades, I began to ask myself a set of different questions. I would look at patients, and although taking care of the acute necessity, I would ask, why did you get shot? Why are you overdosed? Why do you have COPD? What set of choices, conditions, or lack of opportunity conspired to make you unhealthy at this time? And a couple of years ago, things changed for me after asking these questions long enough. My wife is also an emergency physician and a leader. She was chair of our department at that time and throughout the pandemic, but she's also a yoga instructor, a mindfulness expert, and a coach. And after years as a professor, I'd like to think mentor and educator, we decided to combine our forces, and we decided to look more at the upstream causes for the things that we see every day in the emergency department. So we have formed this company to address more healthcare instead of sick care. I've spent a long time able to take care of anything that comes off the ambulance, and it circularizes my career a bit to dedicate myself to preventing people from having to ever get on the ambulance in the first place. And I'm happy to say that we take care of all kinds of people, but we want to make people more effective and durable and resilient before ultimately they face acute needs that experts can take care of under the right settings.
Oh, wow. Very well said. So that's a fantastic mission that you're on. It's so needed. It goes back to that idea that the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? That if we can educate the public, if I know that's a passion of mine, is learning, or whatever you want to call them. I know biohacks is the hot term right now, but basically we're just talking about self-care and knowing what levers to pull, what to focus on. And I think that's the biggest challenge for anyone when they're looking at their personal health, is figuring out, what really makes a difference. Because I'm a therapist, right? So when I'm talking to clients, we talk a lot about the connection between mental health and physical health, and and sometimes it's a little muddy, right? Knowing which one is aggravating the other. And oftentimes when I go to the doctor, we're told to diet, exercise, right? Have a healthy lifestyle. But what that actually means, I find in the counseling office, is that most people, especially even if they have chronic health conditions and they have specialists, oftentimes don't necessarily know what they're, quote, supposed to do to manage their condition, right? Be that diabetes, or if there's a family history of cardiac issues, whatever it is, right? There's sometimes the not knowing is the problem. And so people play whack-a-mole. I've seen, trying to just kind of go on fad diets, or maybe I'll just drink more water, but there's some, the bigger problems right under their nose, and this is just what I see in my own life. This is what I see in working with clients sometimes. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a dietitian. I have no credentials in that realm. And just having an extended discussion with someone, you can uncover some of these blind spots. And so I know the work you're doing is crucial, right? On a societal level. And you were talking about even in the ER, the questions you would ask the sociologist, and it's kind of like figuring out, what are the root causes of some of these repetitive issues that you're seeing right in the trenches.
Well, thank you. As a mental health professional yourself, I would certainly echo any words of appreciation. You mentioned that the mind-body connection sometimes is muddy. That may be so, but it is never severed. It is always present, and even the most obviously physical manifestations of disease, say a cut on your arm, carries with it a host of mental implications, concern about one's immediate future, their work history, their needs to take care of at home. And sometimes it boils down to what will the scar look like and how long is this going to take? but
Right.
but
It's such an inconvenience. Yeah.
but the mind body connection, it may be an extreme example, is certainly always present, and without adequate attention being paid to the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of physical disease, then one can only hope to partially set people towards healing.
Yeah. And so, what have you found to be some of the common factors, or maybe the repetitive things you were seeing in the ER that are maybe the low-hanging fruit, the ankle biters, that people could, with the right direction, hence like your coaching or given some direction, what would be the easiest things to maybe address for the masses, do you think?
Sure. Well, underscoring one of the previous points you just alluded to, and I tried to make, the mental aspects of it all, it starts with self-awareness. So knowing everything does. So knowing where your low-hanging fruit is the first step. If you if the patient is a chain smoking person with an alcohol problem, then the place to start is not really trying to bolster the specifics of their exercise plan and so forth. But in many cases, that low-hanging fruit starts with stopping doing damage, but first of all, having the self-awareness to realize where the damage is occurring. Maybe the damage is more subtle in a lack of cultivation and attention being paid to one's relationships. Maybe the damage being done is injurious exercise. Maybe it's fastidious adherence to diet that might cause a nutritional imbalance and so forth. But it starts with self-awareness, finding out where to begin. After that, common threads often occur, and it becomes a broken record for those of us old enough to understand what that term even means anymore. But it begins with how you move your body, what you put into your body, and what you put into your mind. And the latter also would encompass those we surround ourselves with and the relationships that arise from it.
Sure. And I imagine what we put into our mind can affect what we do with our body, what we put into our body, our mental states, how we think about ourselves, right? How we think about our goals, how we relate to others. All of these things, right, are intertwined. You know, lifestyle's a complicated thing. Yeah.
Very much. I interviewed a PhD researcher on my podcast recently. I asked her, what were some of the things you learned studying health behaviors? For example, she highlighted the fact that we studied groups of women to see what was the barrier to them sticking with an exercise program. And in this particular cohort, they found that they were really repelled by going to the gyms of the time, loaded with mirrors and a bunch of jacked guys with gallons of whatever tonic, and it made them self-conscious and turned them off from exercising. So they were that close to engaging in positive, healthy behaviors, but had barriers to completion. Everybody's got their own, and adequate study is great, but it begins with self-awareness and honest questions of oneself.
Absolutely. Things we know from like motivational interviewing, right? People can be right on the cusp of being ready to take action, right? But it can be that one hang up that derails them or detracts them or pops their inspirational balloon. or get deflated, whatever analogy you want to use. People can be that close. I've been that close so many times. And it's sometimes thinking about how to work around these mental obstacles, right? Isn't that what made curves so popular, right? For those of that are familiar with curves, the gym for women,
Yes,
it's kind of
I think so.
yeah, it was the idea of a place, without the judgment. And I think other gyms have gotten on that bandwagon. And Planet Fitness, same thing, place without judgment. It's like this whole concept is like, no shaming, just come and do you. And I think people appreciate that, right?
So I think it speaks to a greater point, which is if you have self-awareness, then you can find out what works for you. And if you can identify barriers like that, why am I turned off? Why do I not want to go? You can know that there are so many steps to take, but it starts with taking the first step today. And if there's a reason you can't put that foot forward that's correctable, then that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the place to start.
Yeah. And so in your work with clients, given your history, your expertise of the body, of the mind, what would you say what have you found to be most effective with your style of coaching that gets results, right? In the sense that maybe where others fail.
Well, I don't know where others fail necessarily, but I would say the things that are most effective is if I have a firm understanding of what that client really needs. What are their pain points? They don't need a lecture from me. They don't even always need a lot of information, but I'm happy to provide science-based, physician-based information for them when it comes to that. A lot of the answers are within. And so finding a really clear picture of what that client needs to find a better version of themselves as they envision it. Sometimes that's helped by exercises, self-examinations, assignments, coaching tools, asking somebody to actually do the work and find out what it is that they may require, but then actually paying attention to that and helping them craft a custom panel for them. Whether it's going to be exercise, diet, it's going to be core values, what's most important to them from a career and success standpoint. It's going to be different for each. And if I'm not willing to craft a bespoke version of it for clients, then I'm doing them a disservice.
So finding out obviously what the goals are, but then a way to operationalize it in a way that's unique to them, right? Some people have an aversion to paper. Some people have an aversion to computers. So to figure it out, it goes back to that self-awareness, right?
Very much. Very much. It has to be in a currency they accept. If you are attempting to pay somebody with more and more money when what they really want is time, you can only get so far. And if you don't accept the currency of self-examination and coaching, then you need to switch to a currency that the client can accept and utilize.
Yeah, very well said. And so you've been coaching for quite some time, right? You were a doctor for quite some time. What have you found in your observations to be some of the recurring issues when it comes to mental health that maybe lead to physical decline? Have you noticed any trends in that department?
Well, the first thing I'd say, irrespective of any of my work as a coach or consultant, the mental health system in this country, and I suspect many other countries, is unbelievably overtaxed, under-resourced, and at times underutilized. But my department, my emergency department, I guarantee will have multiple patients right now holding in a bed, waiting to be cared for in an inpatient setting for their psychiatric illness. But countless others will present with physical complaints that are manifestations of mental health problems it just, the labels blur. There are plenty of, the most common presenting complaint to emergency departments is pain in the chest, pain in the abdomen, headache, what have you. Well, it's well known that pain is a manifestation of mental health problems too. And that doesn't mean the patient is necessarily going to be able to neatly fit into a DSM page and label, but it may be because of chronic stress. It may be because of a lack of support in their relationships. It may be because of emotional toil, worry about the conditions of their lives, how they're going to pay their bills, or how they're going to feed and support their family, or whether they are fulfilling all those roles, even if numerically or conditionally they might be able to. They're concerned that they're not. And those things often manifest as physical or combination mental and physical problems.
Yeah. Kind of sounds like stress.
Very much.
Can definitely be a culprit, yeah. So stress, I mean, that's pretty unavoidable to some extent. I mean, there's stress at home, there's stress at work, there's self-imposed stress, there's tangible stress. Knowing that we can't really always avoid stress, but stress is definitely a culprit for mental health and probably physical somatic symptoms. What do you feel, or what have you found to be effective in managing stress, maybe in the short term?
Well, when you talk to an emergency physician about short-term management of stress, there are really two ways to look at that. One is, how do you perform at the time under highly stressful conditions? And I get asked that question a lot. And the second, maybe we could cover subsequently, is what do you do in the short term to come off of that? You get out of a crazy shift or some sort of high stress situation, and you have to reset and be prepared for the next. So if I were to answer the question about performing under highly stressful conditions, the first thing I'd say is nobody's got this all figured out.
Right.
People act like they do, and I certainly didn't create this knowledge or suddenly generate it from my intrinsic wisdom. I learned a lot from medical education. I learned a lot from people that you would think would have been my teachers. But where I learned the most over years and years of practice in the emergency department is from the patients and from the patients' families themselves. If you think about it, when I go to work tomorrow at 6 a.m. on my shift, I already know that right now. I can prepare. I can feed myself. I can put on comfortable boxers and socks and have a pen that works, and I'm ready to go at 6 a.m. Almost every person I see that day will have no idea that their day was going to go that way, but they still show up and demonstrate for me what the A game of stress management looks like, at least in the acute setting. So I would couch any answer I give in that the lessons I'm imparting today have come largely from the people I've tried to serve. But to that end, there are several things I would say. The first is how you show up. If I know that I'm on duty tomorrow at 6 then I better be ready to go then, because I have had lots of time to prepare. And the positive nature of showing up in the department and being willing to say, I'm ready to go. How's everybody today? Good morning. Even if that greeting is never heard by a patient subsequently, it will be etched upon me as body language, as positive energy in their room. Hopefully not unreflective of the state they're in at the time, but being prepared, showing up positive is an infectious trait, just as negative energy is also infectious. The second thing I would say under very stressful conditions, and what's often put forth for emergency docs, the most stressful things we do, a pediatric code, for example, a child or a young person who's in sudden arrest or needs something immediately done. I am very aware that my mind and my body are connected, and I have a set of routines. Visualization of the first steps needed is critical. I need to know what's the first thing I'm going to do. Well, I know already the first thing I'm going to do is keep my mouth shut and listen to what's being said and what's going to happen. But if I'm naturally very anxious about a situation's conditions, then I get in the room, I make sure the things are there, but then I try to get out of the way and I sit down, ready to arise when the patient arrives. But I don't need my body language and psychomotor agitation in the room to add to the soon to develop chaos. In fact, conversely, I'd like my body posture to be one of calm, because again, that's going to affect the team members around me that I need to direct effectively. To that end, number 3 would be to engineer the place for success. I can't remember everything. I can't remember a lot of things, frankly. So I ask other people to, and I may give some delegation or assignment, especially over areas that I may not know, or I know that in the past I have forgotten. So enlisting anyone else in the room to help me remember something, to make sure that we have pediatric specific information available. Can you please make sure we have this gear ready to go? I don't have to go search for that now. Somebody is on it. So to try to engineer the performance, my performance by delegation, is the third thing. And then the fourth thing I would say, I don't believe, even though I think there's some evidence that it might occur, I don't believe in multitasking. If you try to multitask too much, then you mess a lot of stuff up. But what I really do believe in is super fast serial monotasking. You do one thing and one thing and one thing. You got to anticipate, you need to prepare, but that's not the same as truly attempting to do more than one thing at a time. So showing up ready to go, your breathing, your posture, your visualization, steps that perhaps you've learned about and that might lower your acute stress response, engineering the performance for success, and then concentrating on rapid serial monotasking and moving on to the next thing. That's kind of the first step.
That one sounds tricky, and I've heard it said before, nobody really multitasks well at all. In fact, our efficiency goes down quite a bit. But monotasking, serial monotasking, I know, like, thinking about what it must be like in an ER emergency medical setting. I mean, triaging, like, I'm sure things are moving very fast, but when you break it up into small tasks in your head, individual tasks, I'm sure it's much easier to maintain a focus and follow through and not let your head get clouded with all of the next things. And this is the same thing we teach in mental health, right? With anxiety, it's, if you're worrying about 10 steps ahead, you can't be present, right? And that's what causes a lot of things like insomnia and other problems, is this mental gymnastics, trying to, check all the boxes, and what if this happens, and what if that happens, and what am I going to do here? But then you can't really be present. And imagine, when it's all hands on deck in an emergency setting, you really, that's a strong skill to have, but it can be applied anywhere in life, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Very much. It's a multi-industry phenomenon, but it works with my family. I many times, if I'm not prepared or I'm trying to do too many things, and then my message with one child suffers with another, or with my partner, or with my siblings. I think giving people your undivided, even if it's brief, they know it's your undivided. And that's a real skill to work on that we all are capable of. But sometimes really rapid serial monotasking looks a lot like monotasking to the observer. But I still stress that if you don't complete the task at hand, then maybe you sort of half aid that one, and you probably ought to make sure that it's done correctly before you go on to others.
Yeah, close your loops, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for all of that wisdom. And I know it's probably just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to managing stress, but that's huge. So preparation, showing up ready, and that preparation can look like a lot of things. Like that goes back, I'm sure, to taking care of ourselves, our diet, rest, mentally preparing for what's in front of us, things that we can wrap our head around, right? And then, like you said, that's infectious, right? Because then we show up as our best self. We show up with that positive energy, not knowing that we have to have everything figured out, but that we're capable of figuring things out as we go, right?
Well, that's right. There's going to be a longer term coping skills. And in the aftermath, though, of those stressful situations, you know, we're built and designed to be stressed. It's okay to be stressed. It's a survival.
Ooh, thank you for saying
protective mechanism. That's why the mechanism exists. That's why cortisol and adrenaline and those things are there to help us. But they also, the design can be foiled by not completing the stress response, not allowing it to protect you, but then achieving completion of the stress response so that you can reset for the next one. And it stacks. You get stressed, you get stressed, you get stressed. So, there's a fascinating summary of this by sisters, authors, Amelia and Emily Nagoski, who wrote recently, mostly for women, but about managing stress and from their own experience and expertise. But one of their concepts is completing that stress response, that you get stressed for a reason under a threat, but you need to then be able to come down from that. Emily talks, I believe it's actually Amelia talks about how she used to think of stress as a cave. You go into it and you get stuck and it's dark and it's scary. But it helped her to then begin to think of it as a tunnel. You go into it, it's dark and scary, but you have to keep progressing to let the stress response play out and emerge to the other side. What does that all mean in real life? Well, after shifts, after crisis patients, et cetera, there has to be a period where we can debrief and decompress. And there has to be sometimes that does not mean, hey, just sit down and chill. It means more physical activity. I've done jumping jacks in the parking lot. I've done, push-ups in the doctor's lounge before I got my briefcase together and went out to my Jeep. It can be lots of different things for lots of people, but allow yourself to continually finish stress responses and you stand a much better chance of resetting for the next one. And then after that, once you've sort of come down from that, spending time with people who understand is critical, people who may know you, be close to you, and understand some of the things that you're going through, people like-minded, et cetera. That's of course important. But one thing that gets overlooked is the importance of spending time with people who don't understand that, who don't necessarily, they're not totally consumed by your thing, and resetting to the relative normalcy of the rest of the population. You get into an echo chamber of all ER docs who just want to talk about their last 7 shifts. That's not necessarily going to reset your mental health in the short term the same way as decompressing, finishing a stress response, and allowing yourself normal conversation about somebody else's issues that you may care about.
Wow. So can't just talk shop.
Absolutely. I've been in a lot of shop talks that I thought would never end.
So does this go hand in hand then with long-term resilience? We talked about the short-term kind of stress survival resilience, but what about the long-term stress management so we don't burn out? Is this kind of the same protocol?
It is inexorably related, yes. That stress that stacks, it has physical and mental manifestations forever. That those physical manifestations then stack and have difficulty being overcome even if you have a good mindset, because you may have done significant physical damage. So how do you create overall resilience on both those fronts and other fronts that may be particularly important to you, spiritual fronts, etc.? I'm a big believer in functional fitness. I think it's great to work out, but to work out in a way that speaks to the needs of daily movement and functioning, bending over, getting on the floor to play with kids and standing up repeatedly. One of my main hobbies is restoring cars. Well, if you want to get on the floor a lot, you either play with children or you climb underneath an old Jeep about 250 times and stand up. But
Yeah.
When we've done studies of centenarians or people of extreme age, so many of them have that functional fitness, walking stairs, walking in general, covering miles, or in most places, kilometers across the earth, just in their daily de-automated lives. That's functional fitness in many ways.
So funny you bring that up, because I like to study blue zones. I don't know if you're familiar with blue zones, but they're like
Certainly.
centenarian populations. There's like 5 in the world, right? Where they're like pretty much, for the most part, said to be disease-free, healthy, past 100, have their wits about them. They're active. And it's one of the things they talk a lot about. Like some of the cultures don't even have chairs in their house. Like they're just, because they're up and down a lot and they do a lot of gardening. It's very light, moderate activity daily, but it's consistent, and that's a big piece of the puzzle, it sounds like.
Most definitely. The movement throughout the day and not getting exercise that's just called exercise for 20 minutes a day, but 16 hours of movement is probably much more important when it comes to functional fitness and longevity. The 4 movements I like to think of, it's like fitness is a symphony, and there are 4 movements to it. There's move more, don't move, move harder, and move fully. What do I mean by that? Well, move more means what we've just talked about. Don't move is achieving stability, being able to hold still when faced with a challenge. The people in my emergency department who have sudden downturns have fallen and broken their hip, or they have faced an imbalance of life and suddenly they aren't able to not move and they injure themselves. Move harder means keeping your muscle and strength at a reasonable level, a functional level, as long as you can in life. You're never too old for resistance training, essentially. And move more fully has to do with flexibility. Can you move your joints through their full range of motion? Because children can, and you could too, for most of us at some point, and you only lose that because you don't do it anymore. And we've consigned ourselves to chairs and to the immobility of our world. What you put in your mouth and your nutrition absolutely matters. I would agree with the more recent adage that exercise is probably the most potent longevity drug that we have, but it's going to be unsupported if you don't have healthy food. Not everyone has that luxury, I absolutely acknowledge, but almost everyone has some choice. And to be able to choose what goes into your mouth in a healthy, vented way is going to help one's longevity tremendously. I'm a big fan of the original Robert Ludlum, Jason Bourne series, and a Jason Bourne quote is, "Rest is a weapon." Sleep, recovery, these are the things that I neglected through the great majority of my life. I'll get to that. Whatever.
Right.
Medical training and parenthood were certainly not conducive to.
No, I was going to say, it's
prioritizing sleep,
the field of choice. Yeah.
And it still isn't today. But I definitely recognize the science now that suggests that inadequate sleep is akin to much more obvious risk factors like smoking, like bad diet, like immobility or sedentary lifestyle. And prioritizing sleep, prioritizing that recovery, that is in many ways among the most important things that one can do to shore up their overall mental health, their ability to perform under pressure, and their ability to then recover from that and be ready for the next challenge in life.
Yeah, I imagine. The one that scared me when I was reading the studies on it was dementia, getting less than 6 hours of sleep and the correlation to early onset of dementia. I was like, whoa, that's real, man. That's real.
Yeah, that's real scary, is what that
Yeah, it
is.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although it's these things tend to be counterbalanced by better and better news in some other fronts. One of which
Mm-hmm.
is that we've discovered much more about the connection between exercise and dementia risk.
Mm.
So if we are more active, it helps our brains too. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like you can do bicep curls and never get Alzheimer's, but functional fitness and movement and engaging with others and development of social relationships, you can reduce your dementia risk in those ways. And if that isn't helping cognitive and mental health, I don't know what is.
There's really no downside.
There's really no downside. You might, if you get injured, you might meet nice people that way too.
Being 40, I know, like I really need to get on the resistance training again because I know my bone density is shrinking by the second.
I absolutely understand. I understand.
But yeah, I don't think it can be emphasized enough the importance of healthy lifestyle and diet. And I know they all work in concert together, right? The importance. And again, you're just a wealth of information. And I'm wondering, in light of everything we've talked about, what do you feel like would be a good starting point for anyone who's struggling? Maybe like most of us, we've dropped the ball here and there. We're coming up on New Year's and everyone's going to get gung-ho again about New Year's resolutions and getting fit. And I'm probably, no exception. But when it comes to overcoming obstacles, when it comes to sustaining these lifestyles, where do you think most people can have a foothold, if you would, like on lasting change? Like any tips, nuggets of wisdom on that in terms of how we can help ourselves?
Yeah, well, New Year's resolutions get a bad rap, but I'm kind of a fan. And you don't have to call them New Year's. It could be, March 23rd resolutions, whatever it is. But I'm also a pretty big fan of beginning with the end in mind. What would you like to be able to do at X point in your life? If you would like to outlive, you saw your dad die young like I did, then I definitely want to feel a certain way when I'm that age or older. I'm almost 60 and my youngest child is 6 and my oldest child is 26. I want to be there the same for her as I do for her. And that motivates me very differently when it comes to daily choices, et cetera. I don't feel the same way about those choices I feel that I felt in the past. So my advice would be imagine what you want to accomplish, but then do not become overwhelmed by all the steps it's going to take to get there exactly. Just find one. Just find one step, commit to that, and see if you can commit to that by a certain date, a certain time. Maybe by tomorrow, maybe by next week. Maybe I'm not going to have this particular dietary indiscretion this week or the next day or the next few days, et cetera. But those kinds of things add up. If you sub an apple for the muffin 4 days this week, then you're ready to go. You're ready to go on to the next one. Maybe I'm going to walk to get that apple. Maybe I'm going to take the stairs up to my office, have the apple instead of the muffin, and so on and so forth. And these things are really additive. Don't get too bogged down by particular goals, especially if, honestly, you've set unattainable ones. Don't call them goals. Call them mileposts. And just make it to the milepost, and then let's move to the next one.
Gotcha. Once we've acclimated, once we get that plate spinning, it becomes more of a habit, right? Part of the lifestyle, right? So it's a lot like the stress stacking you were talking about. We can do habit stacking around the benefits, but it's important to know the why, right? And then the how. Like, okay, but not like the the how in terms of a unreasonable expectation, but just the micro steps, right?
Very much agree. Yeah. And for some folks, in fact, probably many more than do, seeking the help of others, and in some cases professional others, can really go a long way. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people, you asked me about the manifestations of mental health problems that show up in the emergency department, who could really benefit from somebody like you, a capable therapist that would listen to them. Not everybody has that luxury, but almost everybody has the ability to communicate their needs with somebody and then seek to take forward steps because of it. If you don't have, and maybe that somebody in most cases is themselves, but then subsequently reaching out to somebody, cultivating their relationships, seeking the help of a professional, those are going to be critical steps as well. If it's apple for muffin, great. If it's this year, I'm going to talk to somebody at least once, then maybe that's even greater.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing that's part of the sustainable wellness you talk about, which is what can we do that will keep us in the headspace of personal development, of that self-awareness, that insight, and also that we're have a sounding board of validation, right? And what feels worse than like getting excited about your goals and going to whoever is convenient and then they just shoot you down? It's like, oh, you're never going to do that. There's no way.
Well, maybe that's why the first conversation with yourself is the most important one.
Yeah.
You get somebody gives you a bum steer when you reach out to them, then remember the first conversation with yourself, that you are ready to take that first step and get some help, and that is the one on which you might fall back.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's something a lot of us struggle with, is trusting ourselves, right? We see that, when we're insecure, we tend to reach out to other people's for their opinions, for permission, right? But if something is meaningful to us, we've already given ourselves permission, right? We just need to remember, right, why it's important to us, because there's so much noise out there. There's so much negativity, like you said, so many detractors,
Well, I would underscore another point from what you just said, which is, okay, seek professional advice, but in the health and wellness space, there is really a lot of noise. There are more experts than I can possibly count, and I'm supposed to be paying attention. And, so vetting your information sources in trusted science, in actual data and studies, if it's available. But then listening to yourself and putting it into the context of your own life and your own judgment, you can get a lot of good observers, but you're the only one who lives in you. And ultimately it has to pass muster with yourself. But getting trusted scientific advice, of course, is something I would advocate.
Right. Getting the facts, right? Get your facts straight so you know what you're working with. Yeah. I'm a big fan of, like I said, information. We live in the information age. Like, there's so much out there, but it's equally easy to get lost in the fluff and the hype and the maybe not peer-reviewed research, and take something and run with it just because it's a soundbite. So being careful, taking the time to really make sense of what we're learning about health and fitness, and then finding ways we can implement that into our lifestyle in a meaningful way, right? And then getting the support to keep us, on point. So that's where the coaching comes in, right?
Very much. Yes, sir.
Well, you're doing wonderful, wonderful work, Dr. Hayes. And again, I can't express how much I appreciate you being on to share your wisdom and your time. For those that want to learn more about the work you're doing, they can head over to your website, right? Lasting Impact Wellness Group.com, or Lasting Impact Wellness. No group in the name.
That's right.
Excellent. And here they can learn all about the resources you offer, and of course where to find you elsewhere. All your socials here at the bottom. And you have a active podcast, which is fantastic. Obviously I'm a little biased, but I love podcasts. I think they're just a great way to keep our head in the game. I always have an AirPod in when I'm gardening, doing the laundry, and I'm trying to absorb practical wisdom. So glad to see you have that up and going.
Thank you. We would certainly welcome any of your listeners, and I think it would help us both. I admire you greatly for the work you're doing. The needs, as I said earlier in the podcast, for better mental health care are so acute and so obvious to me on an hourly basis. And so thank you for being part of that solution.
My honor and privilege. I created this podcast out of selfish motivation to learn more for myself and to serve others, because it is, I think, a good fight.
It's a vehicle that works for me as well.
Absolutely. And this is your LinkedIn for those who want to connect with you professionally. And that is all good. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know about where to find you? Any place where you're most active?
If you do come to our website or visit with us, please feel free to join our community. We would love to hear from you and continue this interactivity. If it must be by screen and tech, that's great. And often that leads to actual face-to-face interactions with the glorious humanity that I've been working with all my life. And the chance to meet somebody new is a chance to learn something. And that's a quote from my father.
I love that. Say that one more time so we make sure we get it right.
Well, it was a paraphrasing. The actual quote from my dad as we climbed out of a cab in Chicago was, and I was a kid, was, if you meet somebody and you didn't learn anything, then you just missed an opportunity.
Oh, I love that. I might steal it.
It's available for a loan without footnote.
For paraphrasing.
Yes,
gotcha.
sir.
Okay, I'll remember that.
Yes,
I have you on tape. So.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, Dr. Hayes. You're always welcome back on to share how things are coming on your end with the wonderful work you're doing. So don't hesitate if you feel so inclined.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for the honor. Good luck to all your listeners and good luck to all of us in our community journey.
Thank you. Likewise. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care.
Hey, if you're getting value from this content and you haven't done so already, be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast, and be sure to subscribe to the MHT newsletter. That way you don't miss out on any new content as it's released. Links in the description.
Oh.